authors, and I have to say, I ordered this book and came in the mail, and I was absolutely delighted to read it. And it's half recipes from the White House and half story about White House chefs of Asian ancestry, and it could not be more cool. And the recipes are cool, the stories are cool about the chef who got into a fight with Herbert Hoover because Hoover sold the yacht, and that really crushed the soul of the poor chef, and he would never make a cake for President Hoover anymore. And if you're wondering how come Warren Harding died at 57 of a heart attack, you can read his favorite meal, which was filet mignon wrapped in bacon, and very cool stuff. And this is just endlessly interesting. If you wonder what a lemon squall is, you have to buy the book to find out. So Adrian Miller is a James Beard Award-winning author and speaker, and a certified barbecue judge, and a former attorney who graduated from Stanford and went to Georgetown Law School. And he's a former special assistant to Bill Clinton and policy analyst for Colorado Governor Bill Ritter. And he's been author of 4 books. And this one is Cooking to the President's Taste is only the latest. He authored one called Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue, which sounds wonderful. And he wrote one called The President's Kitchen Cabinet, Stories of African Americans Who Have Fed Our First Families from Washington to the Obamas. It's very cool. And we have Deborah Chang also, who's a chef, former attorney also, graduate of Napa Valley Culinary School, and developed award-winning recipes and cooked at a variety of Bay Area restaurants, and worked with Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt, the National Peanut Board, and is a graduate of Stanford and University of Michigan Law School, and has had a career spanning law, tech leadership, and career counseling. So this is going to be a wonderful talk, and we're going to start with Adrian. And so, Adrian, we're happy to have you kick this off.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction. Good people, welcome wherever you are in the world. We're so grateful that you joined us for this time. What I'm going to do is start off by talking about my journey, how I came to find out about these chefs. And then I'm just going to give you some highlights of everyone we feature in the book and give you a quick story or some kind of tidbit about them that will tantalize you so you actually pick up the book and read it. So this opening image is actually from a Truman era in Key West, where there was the Little White House. So President Harry Truman would often go there to vacation, and he would bring along his staff, which was predominantly Filipino. So on the far left, as you're looking on this, is Iraniro Esperancilla, who was the presidential steward, and we'll talk about him a little bit more, but those are some of his colleagues working there. All right, next slide. I'm known as the soul food scholar who drops knowledge like hot biscuits, and that's what I endeavor to do during our time together. Next slide. You can follow me on social media. These are the various platforms. We'll show this again later. So if you enjoy this presentation, please give a brother some love. If you don't enjoy it, hold on to that. There's really no reason to go online and post. All right, next slide. So as was mentioned earlier, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, went to Stanford undergrad, then I went to Georgetown Law School, came back and practiced law in Denver for about 4 years. And then I had a fortuitous thing happen where a law school classmate called me out of the blue about an opportunity to work in the White House. Next slide. So my friend was working on something called the President's Initiative for One America, which was an outgrowth of President Clinton's initiative on race. So on the left-hand side, you can see one of the handbooks for the initiative on race, which had a wild idea. Okay, here it is. If we just talk to one another and listened, we might realize that we have a lot more in common than what supposedly divides us. I know, wild, right? So that went on for a couple years, and then the Initiative for One America was an outgrowth on that. So that's where I actually got a chance to work in the Clinton White House. Next slide. So I was there at the very end of President Clinton's last term, second term. So you can see President Clinton in the middle, and my colleagues in the One America office were in the Oval Office there. So at that time in my life, I actually wanted to start a career in politics myself. I was trying to get a job back in my native Colorado, but the job market was really slow because the internet bubble had burst. So it was tough to get a job. So I was spending a lot more time in DC than I expected. Next slide. And ultimately, I was watching a lot of daytime television, spending a lot of time online. And in the depth of my depravity, I said, I should read something. Next slide. And I went to a bookstore and I was in the cookbook section and I found this book written by this man, John Edgerton, called Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History. And in that book, he wrote the sentence that changed my life. He wrote that the tribute to African American heritage cooking has yet to be written. I thought that was really interesting. And so I reached out to him online, figuring that somebody had written that book because I picked up his book 14 years after he wrote it. And he said, you know what? Nobody's written that book. There's always room for another voice, so why not yours? So that's what really launched my journey. Next slide. So I did get back to Denver, and eventually, over the course of about 15 years, I've written these books. My first book was on the history of soul food. I won a James Beard Award for that book. My second book was The President's Kitchen Cabinet. And this is the first collective biography of African Americans in the White House in terms of cooking. And so I was really honored to write that book. I was nominated for several awards, including an NAACP Image Award. And even though I did not win that award, I got closer to a lifelong goal. Next slide. I've always wanted to meet Halle Berry, and the year that my book was nominated, she was one of the presenters. So here's the progress that I made, y'all. We were in the same building at the same time. It's pretty cool, right? Going back to my book journey, next slide. The next book I wrote was on Black Smoke, which was a history of African American barbecue. And that led to this next book, which we will feature today, The President's Cooking to the President's Taste. And it really was connected to my first book on writing about African American presidential chefs. So while I was researching that first book on presidential chefs, I came across, next slide, Lee Ping Kwan. And what happened is I was going to the University of Denver Special Collections Library, and that library has a 7,000 volume cookbook collection. And I just put in presidential food just to see what would pop up. Now, mind you, I'm looking for research about African Americans who have cooked for our presidents. And then this book popped up. I was a little surprised, picked up the book, read the foreword in the preface, and then read more about the book. And I was just amazed. So when Chef Kwan wrote this book in 1939, that's when it was published. This was the most detailed book by a presidential cook we had ever seen up to that point. Certainly, presidential chefs had put out cookbooks and other things, but nobody took the time to really recount their life story. Unfortunately, this book fell into obscurity. So, I'm picking it up 70 years later, and I'm thinking this story needs to go to a broader audience. And so I started talking to other people, and unfortunately, the White House Historical Association agreed to publish this book, and I was able to recruit my good friend Debbie Chang to handle the recipe part because you don't want me handling recipes, trust me. All right, next slide. So here is the main path that we get Asian heritage chefs cooking for our presidents. Most of these chefs entered the U.S. Navy because at that point, the U.S. Navy was offering a path to citizenship. So we have a number of Asian immigrants who enter naval service, and as they rose through the ranks, eventually they would be assigned to the presidential yacht. Yes, we did have a presidential yacht for a long time. Jimmy Carter actually sold it because he thought it was a sign of monarchy and a waste of money. So the first yacht that was featured in this book is the USS Mayflower. So when you're thinking about a yacht, you're probably not thinking this. You're not thinking about a retrofitted battleship, but that's what the yacht looked like at the time. All right, next slide. So I want to take a moment and talk about the presidential pickle. And this really bears on what the difficult task for cooks, because we want our presidents to be extraordinary people, but we also want them to be a lot like us. And often food is a window on the presidential soul. Now, if you're looking at this pickle, you're like, that's the weirdest pickle I've ever seen. It's a Kool-Aid pickle. Won't get into too much detail just for time's sake, but it's essentially a pickle that you put the cucumber or already made kosher dill pickle in some Kool-Aid and let it kind of soak in there, seep in there, and fully flavor it, and then you eat it. So I think this is a good metaphor for the US presidency because if you like the person in the Oval Office, this is like, one of the greatest things ever. But if you don't like the person in the Oval Office, you're thinking that's completely disgusting. And that's how a lot of people feel about the Kool-Aid pickle. It depends on whether you like pickles and Kool-Aid. All right, next slide. Here's a look at presidential food service. A lot of people don't really know how food service works within U.S. presidency because typically they only hear about state dinners, which is the most public-facing aspect of presidential cooking. But typically, this is the flow chart. You have someone called the White House usher, and over time they've been called the presidential steward. But this is the person in charge of all of the residential operations at the White House. Because remember, the White House is part residence and also part office. And then underneath the stewards, you've got the White House chief executive chef. And then you've got butlers who serve the food. You've got the presidential yacht. You've also got, at one time, we had a presidential train. You've got Air Force One. You've got a space in the White House that's called the White House Mess. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you also have Camp David, which is a presidential retreat. So all these places involve cooks when the president's moving around the country or staying at home. And so it's really involved process, but all of these people work as a team. But essentially, even above all of these folks, the White House usher and the presidential steward is, of course, the first family. And over time, it's usually the first lady, the presidential spouse, who's kind of really in charge of all of this stuff. All right, but I wanted to give you a sense of the various aspects of presidential food service. Next slide. Here's the earliest photo that we have of White House domestic staff, so the people that were in part charge of the residence. And this is from 1877. Now, if we had more time, I would say ask pop quiz. Who was president in 1877? And there usually is a lot of silence. And I would say Rutherford B. Hayes, which of course was on the tip of your tongue, but he was the president spring of 1877 when this photo was taken. As you can see, the residential staff is entirely African American. And looking at the first row, the person on the lower right was named Minnie Monroe, and she was the presidential cook. And the path to the White House kitchen back in those days was typically the person who became White House chef or the White House cook was usually the private chef of that person in private life before they became president. Because usually presidents bought their own staff to the White House because before President Truman, presidents had to pay for their cooks, their maids, their butlers, all of that stuff out of their own pocket. And so it made sense for them to bring their own personal staff. And quite a few of our presidents were wealthy people who either hired their own staff or brought their enslaved staff to the White House because we had a lot of slave owning presidents during the 19th century. All right, next slide. Here is a more contemporary look at the White House kitchen staff, though. This is from the Kennedy administration in 1961. And you can see here, this is very representative because over time, the White House kitchen staff since the 1900s has really been multiracial and multi-generational. So we have a lot of people in the mix here. So we have a couple of African Americans, we have some French immigrants, we have a German immigrant, and then on the far right, we have a Filipino man who was part of the kitchen staff. Unfortunately, the photo from the Kennedy Library does not identify him, so I don't know his name. I've been trying to identify him because I really want to know his name, but this gives you an idea of how diverse the White House kitchen staff has been over time. Next slide. All right, so the first chef that we feature is Ah Loy, who was a Chinese immigrant who joins the Navy basically as a young adult man. He's working on a number of ships, but eventually he gets assigned to the USS Mayflower during the time of President Theodore Roosevelt. And one of the interesting things about Ah Loy is that he was the chef when Theodore Roosevelt was negotiating peace between Russia and Japan. It was known as the Russo-Japanese War. This happened in 1905. We don't really talk about that war that much these days, but it was a very monumental war in its time. And eventually, President Roosevelt was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in bringing peace. But Ah Loy was there and witnessed to history and cooked the meals. One of the interesting diplomatic ploys that President Roosevelt used is that he knew that if he had a sit-down dinner, egos would be involved. People would want to know how close they are to the president. It would mean something. So he decided to have a standing luncheon. So there was no seating. People all had to get their food from a buffet and stand and talk. And so that was his way of easing all the egos. Later in life, Aloy is interviewed by a newspaper as he's close to retirement, and he dishes a lot on the presidents. He talked about what they like and what they didn't like. And one of the things that he said about President Coolidge and Grace Coolidge, who was the first lady, is that she always asked for chop suey whenever she could. So that was a indication that these chefs were able to introduce some different dishes to Americans during their tenure. Now we know that chop suey is an Americanized Chinese dish, but the fact that Grace Coolidge was digging that and really enjoyed it, I think is significant. Next slide. Next, we feature Shiro Tsurasaki. He was a Japanese immigrant who worked on a number of Navy ships before he got assigned to the USS Mayflower. He starts showing up in the ship's logs in the mid 1900s or 19 like the mid 1910s. So around 1914, 1915. He was kind of an assistant steward, and then he rose to the rank where he was the main ship steward on the yacht for a time. So he had very interesting experiences. For the first part of his career in the Navy, people actually called him Shurasaki Shiro. So he actually went to court to legally have his name changed. At one point, he was granted U.S. citizenship, so the U.S. Navy kept its promise of offering citizenship. But then later, because of rising anti-Asian sentiment in the country and racism, he actually had his citizenship revoked. And so he was actually in the news because of all of this happening. After he ends his stint in the Navy in the 1920s, he actually opens up a restaurant in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, so kind of outside the DC suburbs in Maryland, and ran a restaurant touting his fame as a White House presidential yacht cook. Next slide. And then we get to Li Ping Kwan, fascinating guy. Really enjoyed reading his memoir cookbook, and I was so glad that we could include a lot of that in this book. And so he was an actual gourmand and expert chef early in life. He mentored under a famous Chinese chef before coming to the United States. So this guy had culinary skills way before he gets to the United States. He then joins the Navy. He cooked for, if you're a World War II buff, he was actually a cook on a ship for Admiral Nimitz for a short time before he comes to the Mayflower. He cooks on the Mayflower and has a lot of interesting experiences. Many of his recipes are included in cookbooks of the time and newspaper reports of the time. So he was a very well-known chef. He actually did a video for the U.S. Navy on how to cook a turkey. I've seen references to the video in newspapers, but I haven't been able to get the actual video. One thing I want to highlight, though, is in the middle here. After he ended his stint working for the U.S. presidents, he actually opened up his own restaurants in New York and also in Maine. And so this is a restaurant that he had in New York City. And if you're familiar with New York City, where 30 Rock is, 30 Rockefeller, so NBC's headquarters, that's essentially where his restaurant was. And if you walked into that restaurant, he decorated it in a way that made you feel like you were on the deck of the USS Mayflower. So here's a look at the interior of the restaurant. He featured menu items from the USS Mayflower and really leveraged his fame as a presidential chef. The unfortunate thing is that he opened his restaurant the summer of 1929. And for those who are familiar with US history, you know that the Great Depression happened starting in October of 1929. So his restaurant really didn't last much longer than that, and it was unfortunate. He did wait a few years and tried to open up restaurants doing the similar thing of having this decor with the Mayflower and also a menu inspired by presidential dishes. But in all those instances, the restaurants did not work, and so they failed. So eventually, by the 1930s, he's back in New York area, kind of consulting, getting hired out for different events. One of the things that was significant as last newspaper reports of his life is that after World War II broke out, he actually wanted to re-enlist, but he was advanced in age, and so the Navy turned him down. But it gives you a sense of this guy's spirit and his character. So a fascinating person, and I'm glad we could share his story with contemporary audiences. Next slide. The next person we feature is Irineo Esperancilla. I mentioned him earlier. Now, he is a Filipino immigrant. So, the early Asian heritage cooks in presidential history were primarily from China and Japan. But after the Philippines become a U.S. territory after the Spanish-American War, you start to see more Filipinos enlisting in the military, particularly the Navy, again as a path to U.S. citizenship. And that was Esperancilla's path to becoming part of Presidential Food Service. So he joins the Navy during the Hoover administration, but eventually he is more associated with FDR, and he starts working for FDR at Camp David. Now, it wasn't called Camp David at that time, it would eventually be called that, but this is the presidential retreat that's in the suburbs of Maryland. And so he works for President Roosevelt, but spends a lot more time with President Truman. So we see him here serving President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then also with Mamie Eisenhower at Camp David. All right, next slide. Another person who we highlight is Ariel de Guzman. So we tried to pick figures throughout presidential history. So Ariel de Guzman is also from the Philippines, and he's more associated with the George Herbert Walker Bush presidential family. So he starts to work in the Navy, and then he gets assigned to the White House mess. Now, when I say the White House mess, I am not making a political statement. The White House mess is actually a dining space in the White House that was created in the 1950s after the White House was renovated. The White House became, for the first time in its history, a year-round residence, which meant that there needed to be more residential staff. Now, at this time, President Truman was having a very acrimonious relationship with Congress, and there was no way that Congress was going to authorize more money for presidential staff. So, what Bess Truman, the first lady at the time, decided would be the solution was to take the Filipino staff from the presidential yacht and bring him over to the White House. So that starts the association with the U.S. Navy and the White House mess, and then also essentially Asian heritage chefs starting to cook on a regular basis in the White House. The White House mess is really kind of a private, almost like clubby atmosphere. It's only for senior staff at the White House, and it's pretty incredible food. I can vouch for the cheeseburger just based on my time there. Now, that was 20 years ago. I don't know what it's like now, but I'm pretty sure it's probably good. So de Guzman is actually working in the White House mess, and then he is assigned to cook for then Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, which he does for several occasions. And President Bush, or Vice President Bush at that time, loves his food so much that when he becomes president, he actually invites de Guzman to come cook for him on a more regular basis. And this starts a multi-decade friendship between the two men. So even post-presidency, de Guzman would go to cook for the Bushes when they would have family gatherings at Walker's Point and Kennebunkport, Maine, and other functions, even going to the ranch with George W. Bush in Central Texas. So really strong friendship. One of the funniest stories that I have about de Guzman is back when he was cooking for Vice President Bush, Second Lady Barbara Bush was having an event with brownies, which is the young, the precursor to becoming a Girl Scout. And so they had a event at the White House, and Barbara Bush was talking to the brownies, and at some point, de Guzman comes out and he's setting up a bunch of cookies and other desserts on a dumbwaiter. And a dumbwaiter, if you don't know, it's kind of a way to set up food and people can self-serve. And so while she's talking to the brownies, she just mentions the dumbwaiter and then invites the brownies to have their cookies. So one of the brownies came up to de Guzman, looked at him and said, Mister, I don't care how dumb you are, your cookies are really good. So I thought that was an interesting story. All right, next slide. Now, here's Pedro Udo. Now, a lot of people don't know about him, but he's a fascinating figure. So, Pedro Udo was a military chef, and during the Eisenhower administration, and we see on the left, Mamie Eisenhower is trying some of his food, and we've got one of the longtime butlers, Charles Ficklin, who's kind of looking on this scene. So, he was a meat cook, basically, at the White House, but then the European chef who was running the kitchen at that time decided that he needed to make more money, and so he set sail for Hollywood. And this was a battlefield promotion. So Eisenhower just made Udo the White House head chef. Udo was known for his cakes and other delicacies, but he had a really difficult first night at the White House because the first time that he served food for Eisenhower, President Eisenhower ordered blueberry pie. And this is something that Pedro Udo provided. Later that night, President Eisenhower complained of stomach pains, and it was quite serious, taken quite seriously, because Eisenhower had already had some heart attacks by this point, so people didn't really know what's going on. And so the White House physician was summoned, and the president was treated. By the next morning, news of this, of the president having an upset stomach and other things, leaked out to the press, and actually the stock market fell on the news of this just because of Eisenhower's health problems. Well, we learned that Udo could breathe a sigh of relief because it wasn't that, it was food poisoning or anything like that. It was simply the fact that Eisenhower had much too much pie. So he overate the pie, and that's what caused his indigestion. But despite that rocky start, Udo serves through to the end of the Eisenhower administration, and then when the Kennedys come in, they transition to a European chef. And then Udo, instead of leaving the White House entirely, he starts to become the head cook for the resident staff. So he would make the daily meals for the resident staff, which was predominantly black at that time. So I'd like to think that Udo was a soul food chef. Next slide. Fast forward, we get to Christetta Comerford. Christetta Comerford comes to the White House in the mid 1990s, where she was an assistant chef on staff. So initially, when the White House needs temporary cooks, they have a thing called service by agreement. So essentially, you work for a specific event or specific time. And so she starts to work for the White House during as a service by agreement cook during the Clinton administration. The White House executive chef, Walter Scheib, was so impressed by her that when an opening was created on his regular staff, he brought her on the regular staff in 1995. So she was an assistant chef for about 10 years. And then eventually, Walter Scheib and President George W. Bush have a falling out over the cooking and other things. So Walter Scheib gets fired, and Christetta Comerford, after a tryout, she gets elevated to the main role of White House executive chef. So she serves in that position starting in about 2007, and she's there until the Biden administration. She retired a few months before the Biden administration ended. She thus becomes the second longest tenured White House executive chef in White House history. Now, let me back up and explain something. The term White House executive chef does not exist until 1961. That was a creation by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy because she wanted to elevate the position. Before that, the person who ran the White House kitchen was just called the White House cook, the head cook, or the first cook. So she is the second longest tenured White House executive chef. And we love to celebrate her recipes. She's a person of faith, very committed and dedicated to what she does. And another way that she showed leadership is she's one of the first, many White House assistant chefs and people who were cooking there part-time said that that was the first time they've ever been in a kitchen run by a woman, which is just mind-boggling. So that shows you just kind of the stature that she had and how much influence she had. All right, next slide. One of the things that was an innovation during Christetta Comerford's time was the increased acreage of the White House garden. Now, there's been a White House garden since the very opening of the White House under President John Adams. There have always been small kitchen gardens. And for a long time, there was a kitchen garden on the roof. Now, this was small, mainly for growing herbs. Under the leadership of First Lady Michelle Obama, they decided to create a working garden on the White House South Lawn. And so it was a seasonal garden, and a lot of the produce that was grown in that garden was actually used in state dinners and meals run by the White House. And whatever they had left, they would actually send to local food banks and schools in the Washington, D.C. area. The garden is not as active now. It still exists, but it's not as active now as it was during the Obama administration. But that was a key innovation during her time. Next slide. Another innovation was the kids' state dinners. So again, First Lady Michelle Obama had a lot of interesting ideas about how to engage the nation into better and healthy eating. And so one idea she had was to create this event. So essentially, there was a contest nationwide and she held it started in 2014. And so every year until the presidency ended, there would be a contest. Every state would have a winner, and that winner would come to the White House and they would bring their recipes. And the idea was to create a healthy meal. And so they would have this event in August where they brought all these people together. A few of the winners from across the country were selected to talk about their experience being part of this process. And also, there was a meal created using a select number of those recipes. So, really great way to engage young people on healthy eating. All right, next slide. We also feature some people that you just never made the headlines. Like Cristeta Comafor is somebody that people would have, following White House or the news, would have heard of. But this is Johnny Payi, who was a longtime residential chef, and he's Filipino as well. And he's actually related to Iranero Esperancilla. And so he was a longtime kind of cook for the resident staff, beloved. And Iranero Esperancilla's granddaughter, Melinda Dart, is the one that really is the driving force for keeping Esperancilla's story out there. And this is her father. And so she's now working on his memoir and talking about what he meant to White House staff. Next slide. This is Susan Lim. Susan Lim, born of Chinese immigrants in California. She is someone who, or South Korean, sorry, and she is someone who was an assistant pastry chef here in the White House during the late 90s until the early 2000s. So the way that the White House kitchen works is there's an executive chef, and then there are several assistant chefs that that person may have. And then there's a pastry chef, and the pastry chef may or may not have an assistant. In this case, the longtime pastry chef, Roland Mesnier, it's kind of hard to see him because he's under the wing of that giant chocolate eagle. But he was the main European French chef who did magical things in the White House kitchen. Susan Lim was his assistant for a time, and so she would work on different aspects of it. After she finished her stint in the White House kitchen, she went on to run a bakery called the Praline Bakery in Bethesda, Maryland. But we tell her story. Next slide. Then we took the time to actually feature guest chefs. So for the longest time, anytime there was a state dinner at the White House, it was planned, executed by the White House executive chef. Starting in the Clinton administration, they started to have guest chefs. And the Obamas really took this to another level and started more regularly having the guest chefs. So one of the guest chefs is Anita Lowe, who is in the middle of this picture wearing the kind of the blue scarf cap. And she created the dinner when the Obamas hosted the president of China in 2015. And so we include that state dinner meal, and Debbie will talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. We also highlight Edward Lee. Edward Lee is the son of South Korean immigrants. Let me just a reminder, just one more thing I forgot to say about Anita Lowe. She was actually born in Michigan, grew up in Birmingham, Michigan, which is outside of Detroit. Then we have Edward Lee, the son of South Korean immigrants. He grew up in Brooklyn, and then after he finished culinary school, he went to Louisville, Kentucky, of all places, and created a very interesting and dynamic cuisine, merging kind of Southern influences with Korean influences. And that shows up in the state dinner that he cooked for the president of South Korea in 2023 under the Biden administration. And we include that meal as well. Next slide. Here is the current White House chef. The current White House executive chef is Tommy Kerpradit. He's the son of Thai immigrants. He grew up in basically suburban Maryland, and his father was a longtime employee at a country club. Now, he wasn't a chef. He was more like kind of janitor thing at the country club. And so his father got him a job at the country club, and Tommy would work there. And the chefs were noticing that Tommy was very skilled, and he got encouraged to do more and more cooking. And then he eventually went to culinary school and was offered a job. And then while he worked at the country club, the chef saw his talent and just realized that he was going to have limited opportunities at this country club. So encouraged him to do other things. One thing led to another. Eventually, he got the chance to cook at a White House event for the Millennium. There was a series of events that happened in 2000. and he was a by agreement cook. And after he showed his mettle at these millennial events, he was invited to become an assistant chef at the White House. And so when Christetta Comerford actually retired from her position at the White House, he was elevated to that position during the last few months of the Biden administration, and now he is working there in the current administration. So, son of Thai immigrants, is now the White House cook. It was funny that as he got elevated in his position, he got featured on television in Thailand, and friends of the family in Thailand notified his mother, and her reaction was, "What has he done now?" Because she didn't know exactly what was going on. All right, next slide. And then one final person I want to highlight is Masako Morishita. Now, she was never a White House cook, but she's an example of an outside chef who was invited to do some cooking. And so she cooked a luncheon that Vice President Kamala Harris had for the president of Japan late in the second term of, or sorry, late in the term of Joe Biden. And so we feature some recipes of hers in the book as well that I'll let Debbie talk about. So that is an overview. There are a lot more rich and deep stories that we have in the book, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the breadth of who we cover in the book. And now I will turn it over to Debbie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie Chang. I am the co-author of this book with Adrian. Adrian and I know each other from college, back at Stanford. We were in the same political science one class together, so we've known each other for 30 plus years. And he brought me into this project because it's a Asian project, Asian American project, as well as he needed someone to translate recipes and do some recipe testing. And right after COVID, we were in New York having dinner with a mutual friend from college. That's when the idea became hatched for my involvement. So it has really been a fun project, so interesting, and I've learned a lot about the subject matter myself. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My parents are from Taiwan. My mom was originally from Nanjing and then immigrated to Taipei. My dad was originally a native Taiwanese, and they immigrated here in the 60s, went to graduate school, and then moved to Michigan, where my dad was a engineer for Ford Motor Company for decades. And they retired into Carlsbad in the 2000s, and there's a Chinese American community. A lot of them from Michigan all moved together, and that's how I came upon this organization. Was some of them were involved in this organization. So when we published this book, this was an organization that I wanted to get in contact with. Um, so Anita Lowe, who's a chef, one coincidence, Anita Lowe, who Adrian mentioned is a chef in the book, she grew up in Birmingham, Michigan, and we discovered that we're around the same age. We're kind of part of the same community of Taiwanese Chinese people that ended up in Michigan for various reasons. So that was kind of fun. One of the things, so I started as a lawyer. Started out as a lawyer, just like Adrian. I did corporate and securities law during the first dot-com boom at a law firm called Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich and Rosati in Palo Alto. I did that through the dot-com boom, and then kind of had a just, I guess, midlife crisis, even though I was only 30, and just wanted to find and discover more out of my life. And so I was looking at a couple of things to do, and going to cooking school seemed really fun. And so I ended up there. A lot of people ask me, how did I end up in cooking? Did my parents own a restaurant? And yes, they did own a restaurant in Michigan. It's called Dragon Inn. And I remember they owned it for a couple of years in high school. And a lot of people ask whether that fed my interest in cooking. And it may have, like in the back of my mind, as something, possibly that I could do. Like it wasn't very foreign to me. So going to cooking school is not very foreign to me. And so that's how I ended up choosing to become a professional chef. And then I did that for a couple of years, and then eventually moved to tech, uh, back into in-house, got married, had some children, and went back to work in-house as a lawyer, and then moved into business development to negotiate deals for businesses that for startups. So that's how I ended up here. I've always enjoyed writing, and during this time, I also, picked up writing when food writing became very popular. So I published in things like the Chronicle and some other San Francisco Chronicle and some other publications. Next slide. So when I was so the culinary school I went to is called Napa Valley Culinary School. It's part of Napa Valley Community College. And you'll see a couple of pictures there of me in cooking school. It was a wonderful school, about very small class sizes, about 12 students. Our chef was Chef Barbara Alexander. Um, and she was a great teacher, and as part of that we had to cook. In order to graduate we had to cook in restaurants, and that was intimidating. I cooked at a restaurant called Rose Pistola in San Francisco, which closed a couple years ago, as well as Ensaladas, which is still around in San Anselmo, California. So it's Mediterranean Italian food that I cooked. And then after that, I started to do catering with a couple of my friends from cooking school. So that was a fun couple of years when I transitioned. And then I stopped temporarily when I had children and then moved back into law. So Adrian's project brought me back into the cooking world. Next slide. Okay, so most of the recipes in the book, or the anchor point of the recipes, are by Chef Lee Ping Kwan, and that was based on the small little cookbook, not little, but the cookbook that Adrian had in his presentation. Um, Instead of leaving this part at the end, I'm just going to mention it now because sometimes I forget. But we also have, other than Chef Kwan's recipes, which I'll talk about most of this presentation, we have Chef Anita Lowe's recipes. She's got a great bread pudding recipe. Chef Edward Lee, who I did Google. Oh yeah, Adrian answered. He was on Top Chef. His recipes are really makeable at home for a dinner party. There's a short ribs and a buttered bean recipe, and then Masako's garlic edamame dumpling recipe, which is the last recipe in the book, is also a very good one. Oh, and then pancit, some of the Filipino chefs' recipes. We have recipes for pancit and pork adobo. So those are all great recipes to try that did not require as much testing and updating, obviously, because they are current, and we're able to use current ingredients, current word processing, and current recipe style. So sometimes don't leave enough time at the end of the presentation to talk about those recipes, but those are all wonderful recipes that did not require much editing for the home cook, except for Chef Lowe's, who are very complicated. So those required some revision for the home cook. Okay, so now on to the bulk of the work, which was the historical aspect of Chef Kwan's recipes. So Chef Kwan is, as Adrian said, he had some serious game, serious culinary skills, amazing talent, a huge breadth of abilities. In the cookbook, he had over 400 recipes, and they spanned Chinese recipes, which he started with. There are about 20 of those, as well as appetizers, main dishes, entrees, things to serve on the yacht, fruit recipes, and many, many, many baking, cake and cookie recipes. So he was both trained in European cooking styles, as well as Asian food. It was very exciting to bring his work to the current page. However, uh, this slide has a couple of challenges. So there were challenges to his recipes, um, and updating them. And the first one was like, which of the 400 recipes or so should I include? And these recipes give an idea of some of the funky things that existed that were completely normal, like in the last early decade or so that are not normal today, right? So things like green turtle soup, which Mrs. Harding evidently liked. I wouldn't, that's just not that didn't make it. Um, Things that we can easily buy in a grocery store, like five different color fruit jello, didn't really make sense to include. He also had some like interesting combinations, like stuffing. I think back then I remember this in culinary school, and even from the 50s and 60s, like if you look at the old Time Life cookbooks, there's lots of things stuffed in things, and sweet with sour or salty with sweet that aren't exactly modern tastes. So he would stuff bananas with mixed fruit with some mayonnaise and walnuts and yeah, and I think some of the fruit ones had some sherry as well. That seems very last century, and so those kinds of combinations didn't make it. And then he really like to use certain ingredients that I really am not quite really sure what they are. He really likes Spanish pimientos, which I think are the Spanish red peppers, which you can find jarred today. And he stuffed them with shrimp. And this one was okay, but he used this one didn't this one was okay. I think it was just pimientos was just used a lot. So he didn't use very many ingredients, but he would use some over and over again. And I think that's a testament to the modern day food availability, which is all the stuff that we have in the grocery store. Okay, next slide. So these are the recipes that did make it. So these are recipes that my opinion was that people were going to still eat and be interested in. So filet mignon, classic, and President Harding evidently liked it. And clam chowder, London pound cake, chocolate cookies, chicken chow mein, which I think was the first dish. Chicken chow mein was the first recipe in the book. He started out his recipe section with 20 or so Chinese recipes, which I just thought was the coolest thing ever that he brought Chinese food into the White House. He not only cooked things like filet mignon, but he cooked things like chicken chow mein and tricolor pepper steak, which is the cover photo. So a couple of these things to note, which is again not that many ingredients and not that much instruction. And and then if you can see in the slide, um, uh, different things where we can easily get in a grocery store that we don't need to do that he had to do. For example, for chicken chow mein, we are not going to need to cook the chicken over a slow fire for 35 minutes in 1.5 quarts of water. We can just go out and get the chicken breast or the chicken thigh, skinless and boneless, at the grocery store. Next slide. So then we begin testing. And so one of the things about testing, the question that I was thinking about overall through this process was how much should we change the recipe? I did not I wanted to remain historically accurate, yet I wanted people to be able to make it at home and in a modern time. So that was a question that I just had in the back of my mind the entire time. And because these are recipes that his recipes in particular are very common recipes, I think in the preface I just said, you can change it however you want. Like the basic skills and the basic techniques are included in the cookbook. Um, However, so the savory recipes were fairly easy to translate. Like a filet mignon is pretty easy to update. Um, what I needed help with was the baking recipes. And what I did was, and this turned out to be a very fun part of the project that was not predictable when I started it. I looped in Chef Scott Rice, who is the culinary instructor at Florin High School in Sacramento. And he was my culinary school classmate at Napa Valley College. He went on to do specific pastry training at the Culinary Institute of America's pastry program, and he was the pastry department at Gary Danko, which is a restaurant in San Francisco. So I had a lot of trouble translating the baking recipes because the recipes were so sparsely written. The technology was different at the time, and with less modern appliances, less small appliances, and more pure hand skills. And so I looped him in to help, and he looped his kids in to help. And so he runs in California, you have something called the CTE credit, and some schools, which is like a vocational credit that's required by high school. And some high schools have culinary as an option. And that's so he was like, well, we're gonna, get the kids involved to recipe test to teach them about this possible career path of recipe testing and recipe writing. So here's some pictures of things that we did. So the top left is the chocolate chip cookie recipe, which the kids loved. That was their favorite recipes. They put them in plastic bags and took them out and shared it with people. Um, the one on the right is the mushroom sauce for the fried chicken. And then you'll see mise en place, which is the trays in the different trays. Mise en place is the way you cook in a professional kitchen is you lay all the ingredients out before you start cooking, where everything is in place. And so you'll see all the ingredients in place. And then he's got the jelly roll cake, which we worked on, and the backs of some kids that were testing. Next slide. So testing and tasting, here are some things that we did. So you'll see the tricolor steak. I actually did that at home. That was pretty straightforward. The chocolate chip cookie. And then muffins. Chef Kwan had 3 million, what felt like 3 million muffin recipes. And so the kids really liked doing the muffins too because there are a lot of flavors. And then there were some things that were just odd and didn't work. There was a coconut walnut cookie that I felt like the kids were really disappointed because it didn't work out. That's that bottom middle one. And then there were some interesting things like the peanut meringue, which we had never seen before. They're supposed to be moon-shaped peanut meringues. And so that was, all a learning experience for them to try. So the bottom left picture of 2 pound cakes. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking in there because um, the pound cakes required a lot of technique. And the one that looks better, which is puffier, is the one that Scott did. And the one that I did was the one that is flatter. And I'll explain why that happened in the next slide. I think it's the next slide. Oh, actually, well, I'll get to that in a second. But here's an example of the testing and tasting sheets that we had kids do. And, they had to fill out these forms, which is like what worked, what didn't work, what changes were needed, any additional comments. And, they put a decent amount of effort into it, and some kids really tried to help improve the recipe. And if they didn't like it, they certainly told me so in the recipe sheets. Next slide. Okay, so the London pound cake. A couple slides ago, we saw two pictures of a flatter pound cake and a puffier pound cake. I'm going to spend a little bit of time to tell you why that's the case. The London pound cake recipe was very sparsely written, 6 ingredients, 8 lines. There are currently today 3 million ways to make London pound cake on the internet. Um, and But with much more instruction. But it's a very popular recipe, and he had a lemon icing to it, and I kind of wanted to test it out. So I thought it would be a good one for the book, and a lot of people were interested in it. But it was really hard to update. And the couple of words that caused a lot of like difficulty for me was add the vanilla extract, not that part, but add the vanilla extract with the egg whites, which have been beaten stiff and mix all together. So with the egg whites, which have been beaten stiff and mix all together. So first we've got the beating the butter, sugar, and egg yolks together, mixing in the flour a little at a time. Then you add the vanilla extract with the egg whites, which have been beaten stiff and mixed all together. So it all sounds really easy, but it relies on a significant amount of good hand technique, which is how stiff should the egg whites be beaten? Um, how do you mix it all together? Do you dump them all, into the butter, sugar, and egg yolk mixture all at once? Do you do it a little bit at a time? How do you do it? And the way that you do it is a little at a time, gently fold in the egg whites, eliminate the streaks with as few strokes as possible. There are YouTube videos of people explaining how to do this because it does require practice. And so how Scott and I, what we ended up doing was we just ended up adding half a tablespoon baking powder into the recipe as insurance. And I don't know if baking powder wasn't invented when Chef Kwan is around or it just wasn't used. But we're going to use baking powder in our baking recipes because that'll guarantee a cake that rises. Next slide. Filet mignon, also a really good recipe. That's a beautiful picture. That's actually one of my favorite pictures in the book. It just looks great on the plate and is very current. The only change I made to this was instead of putting the bacon on the top of the toothpick, I circled it around, rolled it around the fillet because that's how you see it today. And so that did not require as many changes, but he suggests serving it with sweet potatoes, stuffed sweet potatoes. I think we decided to serve it with just mashed potatoes, but that's a very classic dish and a good one. Next slide. Chicken chow mein. So I think this is the recipe that we used in the cookbook proposal. It's the number one recipe, first recipe in the book. I love how it was Mrs. Coolidge's favorite dish because who would have thought? But it also required a lot of explanation, I guess, historical explanation and updating with my opinion, which is, you don't need to cook a chicken over slow fire for 35 minutes. Obviously, you can just go to the store. And then with today's availability of things in the store, like even with Chinese grocery markets, Asian markets, at least up here all over the place, you can get way more things other than water chestnuts, onion, celery, and bean shoots. Like there's so many vegetables you can put in, and I just said vegetables to your liking. The the fundamental technique was the same, and I didn't change much of what he did other than the ingredients. And even with cornstarch, cornstarch, soy sauce, and Chinese rice wine. Um, it's just basic. Like I think, most people still do that today. Water chestnuts, I've never been a fan of, but and bamboo shoots, I kind of actually wonder. Yeah, water chestnuts, the canned water chestnuts, you could use those, but I think there are other things. If you can, I think you can get them fresh. But I really like bamboo shoots fresh and sliced. Those taste way better fresh than in the can. Um, he uses 1 pound Chinese beans all over the place. And, that's one thing where I didn't know exactly what he meant. It could be fava beans, it could be green beans. Green beans didn't seem to make much sense. Um, it could be like an edamame like bean. There's some things that I, at the end of the day, just could not figure out. Bean shoots, I'm assuming that it's bean sprouts, but maybe it could be bamboo shoots. I don't know. So there's a lot of stuff where it's like open to ambiguity, but the general technique is the same. Next slide. Oh, and that was the last one. And so since I'd already talked about the uh, the more modern chefs, their recipes are definitely included. So try those out as well. There's some good ones like pancit and the pork adobo and the garlic edamame dumpling. Those are really great.
You
Well,
can skip the slide. Yeah.
yeah, well, thank you so much. And I just loved this talk. And I just love this book. And the book is just filled with the recipes. I have to ask both of you questions, but my first question, you just finished, Debbie. What are the favorite recipes from the White House that your family wants you to cook, or that you
Oh,
personally
yeah.
like?
So they really liked the egg roll recipes. They really liked the egg roll recipes when I tested that out. They really liked the chocolate chip recipe when I tested that one, and they liked the cover recipe, the steak recipe.
Yeah, it's very colorful.
Yeah.
Um, and what's the easiest to do, and what's the hardest to do?
The easiest would be the chocolate chip recipe. The pork adobo recipe was also was very straightforward. From what I thought the pork adobo recipe was very straightforward, and I had some friends test that one out, and they thought so too. The hardest ones. Oh, there's actually, I mean, a lot of them are pretty easy. But so I tried to pick easy ones. The shoestring potatoes, that's pretty easy. The avocado and citrus salad with endive, that's easy. Tomato cream soup, the high school kids were able to execute, so I'd say that was easy. I would probably say, some of Chef Kwan's stuff, like the barbecue saddle of lamb, might take a while. Um, and then Chef Anita Lowe's recipes were the jelly roll recipe is hard. That one is hard one. That one requires some serious technique. Um, and then Chef Lowe's, some of Chef Lowe's recipes were a little bit harder. Like like butter poached Maine lobster, could be challenging.
Debbie, one final question, and I'm going to ask a few to Adrian. Um, this is a hard one to answer, but what's more fun, lawyering or testing recipes from 100 years ago? Or is it 50-50?
It's not even in the same category.
So you're not
Uh,
going to answer, huh?
well, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, recipe testing, anything in food, anything creative is more fun to me.
Yeah, okay, there you go. All right. So Adrian, I just love the book. You talk more in this talk about the chefs, but the book is filled with anecdotes. And I wonder if I could just prompt you for a couple of anecdotes. I was laughing over Mrs. Harding when she asked Chef Kwan, "Would you mind uh, getting 120 lobsters, please, for dinner tonight for a banquet. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, so so Quan, he had to be very resourceful, right? So when you get a request like that, the immediate thing you want to do is you want to make the president happy. And so the question is like, how are you going to get all of those lobster that time? Now I can't remember exactly how he got those, but I thought you were going to ask about another one. So I can't remember how he actually got all those lobsters. Do you remember how he procured them?
He never did.
He never did.
The answer was he never did. He could find two. He could only find two lobsters, and he was short 118 lobsters, and
Okay.
they had to change the menu
Okay. Yeah.
for
All right.
Mrs. Harding. It
Yeah.
was amazing. Well, how about this, Adrian? We think of the White House as a very secure place, but one day an entire ham went missing.
Yes. All right. So you're going to go there. All right. So,
Oh, I can't not. I can't
okay.
not. For those people who are envious of people working in the White House, this will put cold water on their envy. They say, "Nah, I'm okay where I am."
Yeah. So this goes back to the days of Chef Pedro Udo. So we're talking about the late Eisenhower administration. So he was going to prepare a ham and, got busy and was left the ham unattended and went on to do some other stuff. And then when he came back to cook that ham, the ham went missing. And they looked all over for it and they just could not find it. Fast forward several weeks later, there was just an undeniable stench coming from the White House kitchen. And so the White House engineers were summoned and they found a ham bone in the internal spaces of the White House kitchen. And so what they surmised is that a rat basically came in and took that ham off the table and went in and had a feast. So yeah,
Just when you're envious of not being invited to White House dinners, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah,
it's
there's a
okay.
whole history of rats in the White House. Yeah, there's a whole interesting history of that. Fortunately, it's more under control nowadays.
So I'm interested in Chef Kwan, Adrian. He was such an interesting man with his book and his restaurant that he modeled after the interior of the yacht, and then he was infuriated with President Hoover for selling the yacht. And could you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the fortunate things is we do get some newspaper interviews of these chefs from time to time, and we get a lot of dish on our president. So towards the end of his tenure, now it's been announced that the USS Mayflower is going to be decommissioned. Uh, a newspaper journalist, actually interviewed Kwan, and then Kwan was known for making cakes. Was very celebrated for the birthday cakes that he made. Coolidge loved his cakes. And so the question naturally went to cakes, and they asked if he was going to make a cake for President Hoover. And Quan tersely answered, "No Mayflower, no cake." So, as I write in the book, his flavor profile in terms of Hoover was very salty.
That's very funny. That's very funny. So, of all the books that you've written, Adrian, I would guess that you're putting this one right at the top amongst the others, although all your others sound fascinating too. The United States of Barbecue, I mean, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue. This, my one of my kids lives in Austin, Texas, which is the
Oh,
home of Franklin Barbecue and other
yeah,
barbecues. I'm
yeah, yeah.
certainly a fan of barbecue. I mean, what, which book did you enjoy the most to write?
Yeah, so I think that that book, Black Smoke, was the I had the most joy writing because I felt that I was growing as a writer, and there was just so much information out there about these cooks that had just been forgotten, and so the ability to kind of compile it and tell their story, and bring some new information about the early days of barbecue, to really establish it as that had a Native American foundation, and then eventually African Americans, both free and enslaved became known for barbecue, and then to fast forward to today when that's less the case, the opportunity just to show the long-term contributions of African Americans and really the love for this culinary style that so many people enjoy in this country was a real pleasure. And I really loved the fact that in this book I was able to pause and just do a deep dive on individual personalities. So that was a lot of fun. And I did a little bit of that also in this book as well. Tried to tell the story through these very interesting people. The unfortunate thing in this case is for a lot of these cooks, we don't get a lot of information about them in the historical record. So a lot of times I just had to work with what was available. But still, even with what's available, we really got a sense of these people and their accomplishments.
Very cool. Debbie and Adrian, well, what is your next book? What do you have a plan for something now that you've done this? This is such a wonderful endeavor. It sounds like you need to have a follow-up book. Have you thought of anything, Debbie?
You know, he had so many more recipes that it could be a part two. And there are definitely things that I would have, and there's so, and I think, I mean, Adrian can talk about this, but there's like so many more Asian heritage chefs that weren't, that we just have discovered. So there's so many more people to feature and so many more recipes to work on.
So you could do an entire part two with different chefs, different recipes, different anecdotes about animals stealing food from the kitchen. Uh, it sounds like different presidential yachts. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Kathy, I
May
want
I?
to ask you.
May I first ask
Oh,
some
I'm
questions
sorry,
and
Lily.
then Kathy? Yeah.
Lily is going to talk, and then after that, Kathy, be poised. I'm going to
Yes.
be asking you for questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Lily?
Yeah. So I actually have two questions. The two questions for Debbie. The first is, did you grow up eating almond chicken?
Yes. In my parents' restaurant, Dragon Inn, the most popular dish was called almond chicken.
Hmm.
And I, you know, we thought it was interesting. And what it was, it's fried boneless chicken, um, and lightly battered, kind of like a fried fish, like fish and chips, like that kind of color.
Hmm.
Then it's sliced diagonal on the bias with this sauce, like this cornstarchy sauce,
Hmm.
and served over a bed of iceberg lettuce and some slivered almonds. And it's really good. Like I mean, I thought it was good. I just wouldn't associate it as being Chinese. This was when I grew up, and we kind of thought it was just an Americanized dish. Now you can find, well, it still exists. So if you're in the Michigan area,
Hmm.
you can still get it at different Chinese restaurants. And there's a couple of YouTube and some good historical insights on the origin of that dish. But it was invented by a Chinese person and kind of suited for for Western taste. So yes, it occupies a fond place in my memory, and it is amusing to me that it still exists and it's become kind of one of those Detroit things, like the Detroit Square, the Detroit rectangle pizzas, or things that are unique to Detroit.
Yeah. Good. I went to school in Michigan and I was in Detroit, but I didn't have a chance to try the almond chicken. And I have to confess to you, I've never had almond chicken. So that's my first question. The second is, I grew up partially in Taiwan and then mostly in the States. And the differences between recipes in the early days, the differences were very clear. The American recipes or Western recipes are more exact. This, that, how many minutes, how many ounces, and this and that. The Chinese recipe, if any, would be a pinch of salt,
Yes.
a little bit of that. So,
Yeah.
did you find that in Kwan's work, or did he become so Americanized that he actually used exact uh, minutes and exact quantity?
Oh, that's such an interesting thought. I never thought of it that way. I always viewed his sparseness of the recipes due to just word processing limitations, which is he didn't have a computer that he'd go back and revise. It was as if he had to write everything by hand and then someone to typewritten it. But to the extent that he was exact, he did have like half a teaspoon, three three eggs. Like he was exact kind of, but vague at the same time. And you know what? Now that I think about it, he could have been much more exact. I don't know if it's due to, being the Asian style of cooking or word processing, but it could have been. But he could have been much, much more exact. If he were, the recipes would have been a lot easier to update.
May I,
Yeah,
may I add
yeah,
another thought to that?
yeah.
You see this in other cookbooks of the era. So I think there was just a general understanding that people already knew the basics. There was much
Mm,
more culinary education. So I think maybe the people that wrote these books didn't feel like they had to go
hmm.
into much detail because they just figured that people knew how to do the basics. That's just one theory I wanted to offer.
Could be an assumption too. Yeah. But so now, Adrian, you know how to actually make cook barbecue, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you have a special recipe that you have shared with others or no?
I am very good at making ribs, and I don't really have a set recipe for that.
Uh-huh.
So I have shared some of my recipes in my Black Smoke book, but mainly for the side dishes. But
Hmm.
I'm happy to talk anybody through how I make ribs, but I don't really have a set recipe. So I guess I'm like Chef Kwan then.
Yes, you are more like Chef Kwan, and actually, you're probably like a lot of the chefs who cook by creation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But thank you,
Mhm.
Kathy.
I
We
don't
have
see
Kathy.
any questions in the comment section, but I do see a comment from Catherine saying, Adrian, you need to go on Bobby Flay's barbecue brawl.
All right. So she wants me to embarrass myself on national television. Uh, all right. Well, I'll think about it.
I've read that some of these older age recipe books are imprecise, sometimes because the chefs feel that their own recipes are proprietary and they are ambivalent about revealing the exact method and contents of what they do. So they sort of give a rough outline, and when you make it, it doesn't come out right. And this is sort of semi-purposeful. Have you read about any of this? Do you think that that Chef Kwan could have had this as an ulterior motive or not, folks?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we call those lesser peas. And so a lot of elders will do that. You'll ask them how to cook something, and then first they'll say, "Well, I don't measure."
Hmm.
And then maybe they'll let you watch them cook. And then at the precise moment when the magical ingredient needs to be added, they'll say, "Hey, baby, can you go get whatever?" They'll purposely distract you, and then they'll add the ingredient, and then you'll come back, and so you'll never make it the same. It's just purely spiteful.
I've
Um,
read that. So you wonder if part of that is the obscurity of the recipes and it doesn't come out right and you have to translate them.
Yeah. But I just wish more cooks would just realize that you bring yourself to a recipe, so nobody's going to make it exactly like you do. So it's fine to share recipes because nobody's going to do it the way you do it. And people can sense that individuality that you bring to a recipe. That's my own feeling.
This is great. Well, my partner and I, is when this talk is over, we're going to be going through this and we're going to decide what we're going to make first. Debbie, do you have any suggestions of what we should make first?
Oh, what you should make first? Maybe the tomato soup. The cover recipe is a good one. The cover
Oh,
recipe is a good one to start with, I think. Yeah, I'd start with that one.
I hope it'll look like that. This has just been an awful lot of fun. And
Do we
so,
have do we have
Kathy,
time?
yes?
Do we have time for another question? There was an interesting question in the chat.
Mm.
Oh, we absolutely do. What is the question, Adrian or
It says,
Kathy?
yeah, go ahead, Kathy, if you want to read it.
Awesome. It's from Jian saying, you're referred to the Guzman-Bush relationship as a friendship, but if Guzman was always the cook, is that really a friendship or was there more to that relationship?
Yes, that's a great question from Jean. I know her. Yeah, so obviously there was an employer-employee dynamic, but you start to see from Guzman's book the affection that he showed towards Bush, the letters and notes that he got from President Bush indicates that there was something more to the relationship. And it's not only the Bush-Guzman relationship where you see that, you see other examples where presidents include their cooks in their will. They go to their weddings, their funerals. Now, there's a code of silence among people who work for a president, so that's why we don't have a lot of information about these relationships, but we do get these hints in various places that there was something richer that went beyond just the kind of that's my boss, you're my cook kind of relationship. So I think there was something different. But yeah, you're absolutely right to ask about that dynamic.
Very, very cool. This has been, again, a remarkable session today. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to both of you. I found this to be just tons of fun, both halves, the history of uh, Asian chefs in the White House and the recipes and translating the recipes, finding out what Calvin Coolidge and Mrs. Coolidge liked the best. I've just found that to be just a ton of fun. I mean, and we'll try that tricolor steak dish perhaps tonight. We'll see if we can pull that off. You know, lots of fun. Muting, if we could just show the slide of next month and the month after. And also, Muting, did you check on the date? Is it in fact May 9th?
It is.
It is May 9th.
Yeah,
Okay, so
because
for
the speaker could not do it later, like the third week.
no,
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
100% fine. I just
Yeah.
wanted to double check to make sure. So, so then we are going to be having on May 9th, not the third Saturday, but May 9th, footprints of Chinese American women, a 250-year history. And you've heard of my puzzlement, and we're going to look forward to see if that's clarified. And then the month after, we're going to just be thrilled to hear Monty Hamigan, our good friend from Orange County, talk about Vietnam War and Chinese American involvement. Very, very cool. Well, it's now just about 11:30, so if there are any other thoughts or questions, feel free to bring them up. Otherwise, I'm going to ask the principals to stay on for just 5 minutes or so, just to chat about this. And then I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And some of us are going to be going to the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum banquet on Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, and that's going to be tons of fun. I'm looking forward to that as well. And otherwise, I want to thank everyone for tuning in and see you on May the 9th. Okay, very good.